Watching The Green Knight, it was kind of what I imagined a serious D&D campaign would be like, if such a thing exists, right? There is intense desperation and hardship and stories of despair. Every person is just riddled with tragedy, and it's kind of a movie about a hard lesson in a hard way. And yet we do see light in this movie. It is very much a folktale as they were told when they were written. It is an adaptation, but it has that feeling of the original folktales, the folktales sans Disney. And as we discussed in The Black Cauldron, the narrator is here hitting again. The little sidekick is here hitting again. Why are these so integral to fantasy? I think we're slowly finding out as we go through this series of watching movies and talking about how we can use the lessons of these movies, the methods of these movies to change the way we are dungeon masters, right? But let's go over characters real quick. There are only a few that I want people to recognize here. There's Gawain. In the movie, it's said as Garwin, or Gawain. There's kind of like a little bit of whimsy to all the names in this movie, but I'll probably just be calling him Gawain because that's what I've always called him. And then, and I think that's how you pronounce it, but don't quote me on that. And then we have the Green Knight, the guy that the movie is named after. And then we have King Arthur, who goes unnamed. I think it's assumed he's King Arthur because he's leading the Knights of the Round Table. And then we have Essel, who is... I'm not sure who Essel is to Gawain. It really... I don't know. To me, the movie implied that she was the love interest of the movie, that he was kind of doing a lot of what he was doing for her in a way, but then there were also signs that he was trying to move on from her as a knight, trying to be more chivalrous, but we're going to talk about later, so this is Essel right here. And if you're not familiar with The Green Knight, it is based on the Arthurian poem. Essentially, it is the following of Gawain as he goes on this Odyssean journey to accept the returning blow of the blow he dealt to the Green Knight as part of the Green Knight's game, or charge. Right? There is, of course, more to it, but we will kind of get into that during the discussion. That's the basic premise of this movie. And to start, I want to talk about something that occurs at the beginning of this movie. It is the weird magical contract in this movie, right? This movie so perfectly exemplifies the kind of messy situations that dungeon masters often intentionally try to get their players into. Like DMs are always trying to get their players to make deals at crossroads or sign their name in blood, or like make friends with an evil witch and then end up in some weird deal with that evil witch that makes things harder later on, that like kind of gets them. And the game of the Green Knight, the one that Gawain agrees to, I feel like it would probably work on players because it's very subtle. It's the Green Knight saying, hey, if you hit me, I get to hit you back, and you get to keep my axe for a year. And this is all while Gawain has this enormous pressure bearing down on him from the king. And I think sometimes level 1 players often have that similar kind of pressure. And it's not necessarily the pressure that Gawain was feeling, unless they wrote it into their backstory. It's not that pressure of he needs to go on adventures so that he is an equal in his social circle. It's more of a pressure of, we want to go on adventures because we're here to adventure, and so we are going to accept whatever challenge befalls us, even if they shouldn't always be accepting the challenges, right? And then Gawain tries to escape the game by decapitating the knight, almost cheating in a sense, which players love to do. And the knight stands and he picks up his own head, and that head laughs. And everyone now knows Gawain is still stuck in the game and cannot escape it. And so there's this like cloud of kind of dread and anticipation. And this is something that you could have happen and then kind of like simmer on the back end and surprise the players with if you didn't want it, because in the movie it is in a year's time he has to return to the knight. But in a game, it's like you could have the knight return. He could just say, and I will return. So the players will be waiting, well, when is this knight going to return? It is a deal that is disguised as a game, and it is just ripe for being ripped off and thrown into a D&D game because there is this unseen agreement and easy reward and inescapability to it all that just kind of messes with players and can, put that cloud of dread over them, make things kind of give a little anticipation to what is going to happen next. And I'm saying cloud of dread. I feel like there's a better word from that. I'm sure Editing Wes is putting it on screen right now. But this is certainly a teaching moment of how to curse players in a kind of fun, positive way that causes more adventure. Like the movie, it is very much a story of hardship and a story of Gawain, like, losing his past self to become this version of this knight, right? But in a game of Dungeons and Dragons, it would be something that would cause more adventure. It would be more fun for the players because then they would get to go on this Odyssean journey. They would have this intense suspense. That's what I was talking about with the that's what Editing Wes put on the screen. They would have this feeling of suspense while they were waiting for the Green Knight. And I really like the ominous air of the scene where it is almost kind of a spell that the Green Knight is casting on everyone, but the subtext there is that Gawain feels like he has to prove himself, right? If the knight had walked in and just said the game, Gawain would still have that feeling, but in the movie, it makes it so it's like almost magical in a sense. Like everyone is being told like something is up here, hey, and yet Gawain still jumps into what does he jump into? No, he jumps to face the Green Knight. He still jumps up to face the Green Knight, even though there is like this obviousness for everyone in the room, but for the audience and for players, it would feel almost like a spell is being cast on the room, which I liked a lot. And then also, speaking of the beginning of the movie, the Green Knight starts in a very unique way with this subtle, like, expository prologue. And this is like an expository prologue is a prologue only meant for exposition. George R.R. Martin starts many of his books this way. If you saw the Game of Thrones show, it is the beginning of the first episode. It's the initial scene with the Night's Watchman in the woods, right? Like this is just a prologue to tell you something about the world, to put the setting like fresh into everyone's minds, kind of set up the world. And the characters in this prologue are hardly ever seen again. And they often perish at the end of the prologue. It's kind of a prologue that is separate and away from the main story in order to describe the world, right? Put in simple terms. And the Green Knight starts with a fire slowly growing in the loft of a far-off building. The first time I watched this movie, or I guess the only time I've watched it, right? I didn't even notice the fire was in the building, and it took like as you're watching this prologue, it says like producer, executive producer, starring, right? You get some title credits. And it wasn't until the fire was in full swing that I noticed, there's a fire in the background of the scene, because the main part of the scene is like goats and geese and things. I think there's like a guy sleeping. And the camera is slowly zooming away from this as this happened. And eventually, as the fire grows, a man and woman exit a door. And as the woman mounts the horse and rides off, the man pulls a sword from the horse's saddle, and he goes to face someone, but then the camera pans back into a window. We never see what happens to these two people. And while something could be said about the parallels of this initial moment and the story itself, about what this says about Gawain, this little prologue we get to see also just shows us a part of the world. It gives us an understanding of where we are, and it kind of sets the tone for the rest of the movie. And this is something that I've often kind of thought about, not only in my personal writings, but also in Dungeons and Dragons, because it's this idea of having expository prologues that often foreshadows future events, that is something that just appeals to me a lot. I like that idea of like setting a little anticipation, suspense, foreshadowing for my players, so it kind of like gets them in the mood to act in the world, to adventure in the world, right? And I feel like it is often the case that the readers, the viewers and sometimes the players have this unconscious understanding of things that determine the context of their conscious understanding. Does that make sense? I hope that makes sense. Like this scene, you aren't really thinking about what this scene says about the world, right? You're not watching this scene and thinking, oh, well, this is saying that like this world is kind of harsh and that there are things happening in this world that are like that the kingdom is in disarray, and like you're not really thinking about that. You are just understanding the tone of the movie. You're understanding what is being set up for you. And then as the camera pans back and pans down to Gawain, you understand who the main character is, right? Simply put, it kind of just sets the mood, and these sort of prologues are perfect for that. And for a long time, I thought this would be very hard to do in D&D. Like, this would be very difficult to do in Dungeons & Dragons. Nearly impossible, in fact, for me, without breaking away from the player's point of view. And I'm not really a fan of breaking away from player's point of view because I want them to feel like they are in their role, right? I don't want them to feel like an audience member. I want them to feel like they are playing a character, right? And I think breaking away from that takes them out of that. Not that there aren't benefits to it, but I thought this would be very hard to do without breaking away from my players, because my main examples were like often books like Song of Ice and Fire, where the expository prologue is totally different, includes totally different people. It is very far away from what is happening with a character that is often deceased by the end of the chapter. But The Green Knight showed me that a simple event out a window is enough, right? Like, this is a very strong opening scene that gives a ton of information to the audience, and it is less than a minute long, and it's very simple. It is just, there's a fire, the fire spreads, someone opens the door, you see who is very likely either responsible for that fire or being chased by the person who is responsible, right? You see that there is conflict going on. You see that the conflict is so extreme that the man feels that he needs to pull the sword from his horse and fight with people, right? And he is sacrificing something so that someone else can live their life. And this is the sort of mood that this movie is setting. And of course, more could be said about the parallels of this opening scene and the story itself, and also the juxtaposition of this seemingly peasantry person defending the person that he loves against someone else, right? And how, his chivalry is shown, but then it pans back and we see Gawain, who is the opposite of chivalrous, at least as it's defined in Arthurian legend, right? But in a game of D&D where the players are often the ones leading the story, something like that is going to be much, much harder to do. And I think we will just move on. We've been talking about the prologue for long enough. And speaking of things that are less than a minute, the narration. I don't know why I have been loving the narration of fantasy movies lately. It makes me want to just like narrate the beginning of my games, just write like a little, I don't know, narration, I guess, a little intro to the beginning of all my sessions, and it just gets me in the fantasy mood, right? Like when I get that lore drop at the beginning, I'm like, yes, hit me with the appendix section, please. After this, I feel just really inclined to write an intro to my next session. Everything about how I would do narration in a game is in the Black Cauldron video. Go watch it if you really like narration as much as I do. I don't think there's a lot of people that are as excited about someone just like reading lore at the beginning of movies, but for some reason, I love it. Maybe it's just because The Lord of the Rings did it. I don't know. It brings me back. But let's talk about NPCs. Let's talk about a specific NPC. I guess all characters in movies are NPCs, or maybe they're PCs because the actors are playing them, right? What a paradox. But let's talk about a specific character of this movie that feels like a great NPC. I like this character a lot, and it is the Scavenger. The Scavenger is one of the secondary antagonists of the movie. He's my favorite secondary antagonist of the movie, and I feel like he would go great in a game of Dungeons and Dragons. I really wish I could just show you the whole scene I'm talking about, but I know YouTube won't like that. But if you've seen the movie, you know kind of what I'm talking about, and I'll go on to describe him a little bit. Right? He is essentially met by Gawain after Gawain happens upon this recent battlefield, and he is scavenging that recent battlefield. Right? He is going from soldier to soldier, taking what he can, and he has this like kind of crazy outfit on. It's how I would imagine a character described like in a book or at the game table. Not necessarily one that would be in visual entertainment. Right? He has this cord threaded through rings that he has like tied about his neck. So he's got all of these rings on his neck, and he's constantly like fidgeting with it and tugging at it because it's a cord around his neck, right? With metal pieces on it. And his boots are so small that he only walks on the ankle of the boot, right? Like his foot doesn't fit into the actual boot part of the boot. It doesn't fit, so it's like flat with the boot. It only goes into the ankle of the boot, and then the sole of the boot is like sideways next to his foot as he's walking around because he stole some boots off of someone because he liked the boots, but they didn't fit him. They aren't his boots, right? And I think this says a lot about the character. Just these things say a lot about the character because he wants to, despite, being a peasant of a feudal age, he wants to like look and feel good like all of the like, knights and noblemen and stuff. Which isn't really bad in and of itself. Right? Like wanting to be equal in a world where you are constantly mistreated is not a bad thing. But he also has this sort of aloofness that is just very unnerving. And, it like anybody following you around and acting unusually nice is probably not your friend. And we see this streak of anger in him towards the end of this initial conversation, right? As Gawain is walking through this battlefield, the Scavenger runs up, assuming he is a knight, and begins talking to him. And when he mentions, when he mentions like death, or even the death of his brothers, the death of the people in the battlefield, we see this sort of apathy in him, which is kind of like a sign that something might be off with this person. But when he talks about himself as the conversation goes on, as they're walking through the field, he becomes like very emotional and very prideful of himself. And when it comes to no reward for something that he offered, he becomes very angry. We see that when things are not about him, we see this aloofness, we see this apathy, and then when we see things that are about him, we see very intense emotions that often lead to anger. And then the second time we see him, he swings between that joy and anger as he robs Gawain. He uses this unpredictability to create a sense of unease. And when it comes to his partners, I don't think I would call them friends, right? He has complete disregard for their safety. It is just this constant, malevolent narcissism that I think everyone can recognize, but everyone is often kind of unsure what they're recognizing. Like something feels off. This guy's being way too nice. He has way too much apathy towards like very serious things. And you might think like, oh, well, maybe he has just seen a lot of death. He's clearly a scavenger, so maybe he has just gotten used to it. But then when you see him being narcissistic about himself, you realize that it's not that he has just seen a lot. It's that he just doesn't care because it doesn't affect him. He only cares about things that affect him. And this display of this character really showed me that if we can just remember like some opinions of our NPCs, we can show a lot about them. Because like playing NPCs, just improvising, doing your best to stay in character is often difficult. But for this character, if we remember his apathy towards death and his own narcissism, we can create a feeling of unease and a recognition of, what many would probably call like the evil part of our society, the selfish part of our society, because that is what he is like all about, essentially, right? He is completely selfish. And when he gets a hold of the Green Knight axe, Gawain's axe, he abandons his partners, again, I wouldn't call them friends, to go prove himself, to go raise himself up. And again, there could probably be something said about the parallels between this individual and Gawain, right? Because this individual, he learns about this quest and he says, well, I will prove myself on this quest. And it's like, that's exactly what Gawain is supposed to do. Why is Gawain the chivalrous knight and this guy is like the selfish pauper? And I think that is the lesson that Gawain learns. It's not that he should be going on this quest for this selfish reason. But on a lighter note, and something that also involves NPCs, I really like the trinkets of this movie. Right, like the Bell of Essel, the belt of protection from Gawain's mother. This is something that kind of reminded me of Baldur's Gate 3. Because every time you loot someone or pickpocket someone, they always have like something unique to them on them. They have like a little carving of a bear or something. That's a bad example. They have a journal or a, I hate that this is popping into my mind, but they have a special set of underwear. What was that about in Baldur's Gate 3? Everyone had their own underwear. I guess that makes sense. They're from all totally different lands, but you see the uniqueness in Baldur's Gate 3, and that was something that this movie had too, is they had little trinkets of other people that reminded Gawain of those past people. Like, we have all these little things that represent us in our lives, and when we give one away, it's like we gave a part of ourselves away. And the movie used this to really show Gawain's past, and really show his changing opinions on that past. And for games like, Baldur's Gate and Dungeons and Dragons, which are, I feel like maybe Baldur's Gate is Dungeons and Dragons, but Dungeons and Dragons isn't Baldur's Gate. But for games like Dungeons and Dragons, they're also just fun little things that your players will see on their character sheet, and they'll think like, oh yeah, that NPC from 4 sessions back gave this to me. And they'll laugh and they'll think like, oh yeah, that was from this adventure. And it's like opening up a junk drawer and finding an old rock that you picked up on a field trip as a kid and remembering that field trip and being back in that moment, even though it's just an item written down on a character sheet. This is something I've kind of unintentionally done in a lot of my games, and it seems like players really like it. They just like having like fun little things they've found in the world that remind them of past adventures they've on. Little like prizes and trophies that might not be gold. It might be a little carving of a bear, but it reminds the players of where they have been and what they have done. I hope that wasn't an ominous way to say what they have done. That feels very murder hobo-y. It reminds them of what they have done. No, it just reminds them where they've been, what they've done. But let's talk about the tone of this movie. This movie had me thinking a lot about the scenes of my game, because the movie itself, it had very intentional cinematography, very intentional settings and lighting, and there was a strong sense of this feeling of wonder as Gawain went farther and farther from his home. And for me, when I see these sort of beautiful environments, I begin to like almost write them in my head, like describing this scene, the lighting on the ivy on the green chapel, right, where the Green Knight sits. And it's almost like this practice for me of how I describe scenes. And I felt the same way actually when I watched Nosferatu, which is kind of the opposite end of this spectrum of wonder, because Nosferatu is like this dark wonder and forebodingness that just hangs over the whole movie. But it makes me realize that in the same way that like a painter needs references, so too do we as writers need to see like the beauty of the world, right? We need to recognize what we want in our games, the emotions we want in the games, the feelings we want in our games in other parts of our lives and in other media, to think critically about those things. I think it was Anthony Bourdain that talked about like, if you want to be a writer, go see the world. Because it will inspire you. And he is he's right in that sense, even if the world is through the eyes of 14th century poetry remade into 21st century entertainment. Sometimes it's okay to just be like a little pretentious and see beauty in really ordinary things, right? And kind of romanticize things to give that mood to what is going on in the world. But to do that, I think we have to like witness beauty and learn from it and practice writing it. And for this movie in particular too, I think we can recognize that so often we are simply retelling old stories in a modern way, right? It is that beauty of the past that we are borrowing from rather than the beauty of the world. And we almost exist in this continued oral tradition in that way, like as we explore the fantasy genre. I think that's what a lot of the fantasy genre is about, is re-exploring like these past folktales, these past stories from mythology, and bringing them into like this modern romance almost. Not romance as in the sense of like rom-coms, right? But romance in the sense of like the romantic era of painting. Something that just feels, that just has a little more wonder to it. A place where the lighting is softer, if you will. So hopefully you learned something from this video. Hopefully it has you thinking about your game in a different way, or it was at least entertaining. My name is Wes, this is my dog Prismo, and this channel is TableTopWriter, where I look at methods of writing through the lens of tabletop gaming, and also sometimes through the lens of movies towards tabletop gaming. Does that make sense? Hope so. Anyways, thank you again for watching, and I will see you next time. Enjoy the blooper. Stretchy Dog.